What truly pulls you into a story, right from the very first sentence?
Yeah.
Is it just like beautiful writing or thrilling events? Or is there something deeper going on, something maybe in our brains?
Mm.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into the fascinating brain science behind stories. We're drawing some really incredible insights from Lisa Cron's book, Wired for Story.
That's exactly it. And our mission for this deep dive, really, is to figure out why some narratives just grab us so completely
Right.
and how our brains are, well, quite literally wired for story. We want to reveal what a story truly is
Yeah.
and maybe what it isn't.
Okay.
And understanding this, it can unlock key insights, not just for writers, but really for anyone who wants to understand how information genuinely engages us.
Okay, let's unpack that then. A lot of us, I think, we instinctively think a story is just, well, something that happens.
Sure, that's common.
But if that were true, you could just sit on your lawn watching cars go by and be entertained,
You're
right?
You wouldn't last long.
You'd probably be bored stiff in like 10 minutes. And think about those rambling stories we've all heard, maybe even told ourselves.
Oh, yeah.
Like, did I tell you about Fred? He was supposed to come over, but it was raining. And like an idiot, I left my windows open. My new pouch got soaked, paid a fortune for it. Now I'm worried it'll mildew like stuff in my grandma's attic. She's over 100, It just keeps going.
It's just a list of things.
Exactly, a collection of events. But you lose interest fast. I'll admit I'm sometimes guilty of telling those stories myself.
We all are, probably.
It really shows you need that laser focus.
And what's fascinating, building on that, is that a story isn't just something that happens to someone either.
Okay, so what else?
For a narrative to really hold us, it needs what Lisa Cron calls a singular reference, or maybe a yardstick. Everything has to be filtered through a central me, the protagonist.
A central me.
Yeah. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio, he points out our brains process real-life sticky situations with that central reference. Like if you're talking about your parents' inheritance with your brother, your mind might jump around, but you, the me, never drops out. That's the anchor.
Got it.
And literature, it seems, is modeled precisely on this inherent brain function.
Okay, so if it's not random events and it needs this singular reference, this me,
Yeah.
what does that actually mean for deciding what goes in the story? How do you keep it focused?
It means stripping away anything, absolutely anything that doesn't relate directly back to the protagonist's core quest. Elmore Leonard, he famously said, a story is real life with the boring parts left out.
Right, I've heard that.
And those boring parts, they're anything that doesn't clearly impact what you, the reader, are dying to know.
Which is?
Will the protagonist get their goal? What's it going to cost them? And crucially, how will it change them?
Okay.
What truly hooks us, what keeps us turning pages, is that dopamine-fueled desire to know what happens next. Without that clear path, those clear stakes, nothing else really matters.
That's a really powerful way to think about it, putting the reader's curiosity right at the center.
Exactly.
But, sometimes writers focus so much on stunning prose, really poetic imagery. How does that fit with just making the reader care what happens next?
Well, it's an important distinction. Beautiful language, vivid imagery, they're great, they're appealing, sure, but they are secondary. They come second to making the reader care what happens next. Think about Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code.
Okay, yeah, huge seller.
Huge. Critic Philip Pullman, he described Brown's prose as, I think, flat, stunted, and ugly.
Ouch.
Yeah, but millions, billions of people read his books. Why?
Because you have to know what happened.
Exactly. He excels at making you need to know what happens next. If the reader doesn't have that internal drive, that question, then all the exquisite writing in the world becomes what they call in the trade a beautifully written who cares.
Huh? A beautifully written who cares. That really shifts my perspective on what makes a story work.
Okay, so beyond the external stuff, the events, what's really driving the plot then? Is it just the action?
No, not just the action. The plot's real goal isn't just external stuff. It's designed to force the protagonist to confront an internal issue.
An internal issue, like a flaw.
Often called a fatal flaw, yeah. Think about romantic comedies, right? The main character chases one idea of success the whole movie.
Right, like the big job or the perfect partner.
Exactly.
Right.
Only to realize by the end that true success is something totally different, usually something internal.
Oh.
Or take Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. Her self-absorption, that's a classic fatal flaw. Her incredible gumption, her drive. When it's harnessed by that flaw, it leads her to push away the only man who's truly her equal.
And how does that connect to the story's theme? Because theme sometimes feels a bit general, like just a topic.
Yeah, people often think that. But theme, in this context, is way more than just a general topic. It's the definitive point of the story.
The point. Yeah. For Gone with the Wind, just calling it a sprawling, steamy epic doesn't really get to the heart of it.
It's kind of vague.
Right. But if you describe it as being about a headstrong Southern belle whose unflinching gumption causes her to spurn the only man who is her equal as she ruthlessly bucks crumbling social norms to survive during the Civil War.
Okay, that's much clearer.
It becomes much clearer, much more compelling. It tells you exactly what the story's really about on that deeper internal level.
This brings up a really crucial point for you, the listener. What do you want people to walk away thinking about after your story?
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's a novel, sure, but also a business presentation, maybe even just a conversation you're having. How do you want to change how they see the world, even a little bit?
Yeah.
What does your story say about human nature?
It's pretty compelling how this links directly to brain science, that neuroscientist Antonio Damasio. He has this crucial insight. We are not thinking machines that feel. Rather, we are feeling machines that think.
Feeling machines that think. I like that.
It flips the script, right? He showed this with patients like Elliot. High IQ, totally intelligent. But after losing a small part of his brain responsible for emotion, he couldn't make simple decisions. He was paralyzed by choice.
Wow. So emotions aren't just extra.
Not at all. They're fundamental. They're essential for how we reason, how we make sense of everything.
And this is exactly why stories hook us so deeply. They let us try on for size, someone else's hoax, their fears.
Vicariously.
Yeah. Cognitive psychology professor Keith Oatley talks about literature providing a safe space to refine our emotional understanding.
A simulation.
We can feel the pain, the joy, without the real-world consequences. Remember that line in Citizen Kane? The newsreel producer barking, "Nothing is ever better than finding out what makes people tick."
Yeah.
Because with that knowledge comes predictive power, right? Knowing when to hold them, when to fold them.
When to run for cover.
Exactly. We always hear that advice. Show, don't tell.
The classic.
And it's more than just showing physical actions, isn't it? It's really about revealing a character's, their inner logic, their emotional journey.
That's a great way to put it. Inner logic.
For instance, instead of just saying Anne was sad, you show her expectations getting crushed.
How?
Like, Anne expects Jeff to be glad he finally left Michelle. Instead, he just sits there hunched over, staring mournfully at the embarrassingly dirty rug.
Okay.
Yeah.
That immediate concrete detail lets us feel her disappointment. You see his reaction through her eyes.
Right.
And that vividness, that specificity, helps avoid what Cron calls the peril of vagueness. A story really falls flat when it's vague about the important stuff.
So lack of specificity is the enemy.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
It kills engagement. For example, we need to know the specific reason a character does something. Why is Holly avoiding Sam?
Right. Is he a stalker? Is she in love? Does she owe him money?
Exactly. Without knowing the why, we're just watching. We don't know how to feel or what might happen. And similarly, a character's specific internal debate or their emotional journey that has to be shown, not just stated.
So not just Holly racked her brain for an answer?
No. We want to know what thoughts actually went through her head. Like in Eleanor Brown's The Weird Sisters, there's this great detailed internal monologue.
Ah!
Those concrete details, those specific thoughts and reasons, that's what lets us connect, predict, and really care.
This idea of specificity, it isn't just for novels, is it?
No. Definitely not.
Think about a business presentation. If you're vague about the problem or the solution, you lose people fast.
Totally. Or even just chatting with someone. If you don't give the why behind what you're saying, people just kind of drift off.
But what about the other side? Too many specifics.
That's a real danger, too.
Our brains can only hold, 7 facts at a time? Something like that?
Around there, yeah. The working memory is limited.
So if you get hit with too many details too fast, you just shut down. Like that example Cron gives of describing a yellow room, with the fluffy blue and green paisley quilt and the craftsman rocker and the oak end table piled with books and dust and the huge brass lamp and 16 unpacked boxes.
Whoa, stop. It's too much.
It's overwhelming. You can't picture it. You just get lost.
That's the critical balance you have to strike. Every sensory detail, every description of scenery, it must have a story reason.
The story reason.
Yeah. George S. Kaufman famously quipped, "You can't hum the scenery."
Ah, I like that.
The description of a room, say, it should reveal something about the person living there, or hint at a plot point, Or maybe tell us something important about the community, the vibe.
Purposeful detail.
Exactly. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, In Love in the Time of Cholera Masterclass, the description of Jeremiah de St. Armour's parlor.
Oh, yeah.
Filled with an old camera, walls papered with photos of children. It paints this vivid picture, sure, but it also reveals something really profound about the character, about the city's future, all seen through Dr. Urbino's eyes. It's all doing work.
That makes so much sense. Every detail pulling its weight. You know, when we talk about forcing that internal change you mentioned earlier, it makes me wonder what actually drives that change. It feels like it's always linked to some kind of challenge, some difficulty.
Absolutely.
What is it about conflict that makes it such a powerful agent of change in stories, and maybe in our own lives, too?
Well, it's kind of a cognitive secret, really. The brain, our brain, is actually wired to stubbornly resist change.
Even good change.
Even good change.
Yeah.
Because its main goal for millions of years has just been survival, maintaining a constant, stable equilibrium, homeostasis.
Okay.
But story, by contrast, is all about change. And change only happens as a result of unavoidable conflict.
Unavoidable.
Yeah. The protagonist's quest, it almost always starts seeming kind of easy, manageable, but then it escalates.
Got an example?
Sure. Think about John L. Sullivan and Preston Sturges' brilliant 1941 film Sullivan's Travels. He's this privileged Hollywood director, tired of making comedies, fluff. He wants to direct a serious picture, a true canvas of the suffering of humanity.
But he doesn't know anything about suffering.
Exactly. He has zero real experience. So he sets out to get some. Dresses like a hobo.
How does that go?
Predictably badly. He gets robbed, assaults a cop by mistake, gets arrested, sent to a brutal prison work camp. He finally gets his human suffering without an escape clause.
So he learns his lesson about suffering.
He learns a lesson, but it's the exact opposite of what he expected. He discovers the profound importance of comedy, of laughter, not suffering. Conflict forced the change, but not the one he planned.
Wow, that's a great example of how things can just spiral. And the trick then for a writer is maximizing what Cron calls the catapult effect.
Exactly, maximizing the catapult. Each cause in a story should trigger an effect that's unexpected, but still perfectly logical.
And it creates an even bigger problem.
That's the key. It creates a bigger problem. Think about The Graduate.
Okay, Benjamin Braddock.
Right. He tries to be such a jerk on his date with Elaine, Mrs. Robinson's daughter, hoping she'll never want to see him again.
Trying to get rid of her.
And his plan works perfectly, except for one huge, unexpected consequence. He falls for her, hard, and now he's completely alienated her.
Oh, wow.
By solving one problem, getting Mrs. Robinson off his back, he's created this massive new one, which catapults him into a whole new quest.
That's brilliant.
And it's also really vital not to make the force of opposition, the antagonist, completely evil.
Not pure black hat.
No. A little smidgen of maybe, as Cron puts it, goes a very long way in creating suspense.
How so?
Well, imagine Ted Bundy shows up with a steaming bowl of homemade chicken soup when the protagonist has the flu.
Oh, okay. Creepy.
Right. We don't know, has he had a change of heart, or is that soup laced with arsenic? Hello, suspense.
Got it. That uncertainty is key.
And what's also fascinating is how characters often, they start risking $1 but end up betting the farm, right? The stakes escalate. But they often fret more over the small stakes at the beginning.
Like worrying about scratching the car before it goes off a cliff.
Pretty much. Think about Cameron in Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh yeah, Cameron Fry.
He starts out whining and terrified about driving his dad's precious vintage Ferrari, the car his dad loves more than life itself.
He's paralyzed by fear.
Totally. But by the end, after finding some grit through all the escalating chaos, he intentionally puts a dent in the car and then accidentally knocks it into a ravine.
Oh.
And then, crucially, he finds the courage to actually stand up to his father and tell him what happened. It connects right back to Aesop's wisdom. Men often bear little grievances with less courage than they do large misfortunes.
That is so true, isn't it? It's often the little things that get under our skin the most until the stakes become undeniably huge.
Yeah.
This makes me think about a really common myth in storytelling. The idea that withholding information, saving it for a big reveal, is what keeps readers hooked.
Ah, the big twist.
Yeah. But how does that square with everything we've just talked about? About the brain needing cause and effect, needing to make sense of things?
That's a great question, because the reality is withholding information often robs the story of the very thing that truly hooks readers.
Oh, so?
Our brain is fundamentally wired for cause and effect. It's constantly seeking meaning, trying to figure things out. Cron suggests using the and so test.
The and so test.
Yeah, does this event logically lead to the next? And so, what happens because of that? It keeps that cause and effect chain strong.
Okay.
True reveals, the really effective ones, like Darth Vader booming, "No, I am your father."
Oh, spoilers. Just
That reveal is shocking precisely because it makes everything that came before it suddenly make sense in a new, believable way. It recontextualizes everything.
Oh, okay. It has to make retroactive sense.
Exactly, which means a lot of avant-garde fiction, like, say, Ulysses, which deliberately plays down plot and clear cause and effect.
Right, can be tough going.
It often ends up being more of a puzzle. It makes the reader feel smart for figuring it out, maybe.
But it's not necessarily providing that narrative thrill.
Right. Not that deep, compelling story joy that comes from following a character through meaningful change driven by conflict. Ultimately, good storytelling usually requires you to tell the reader up front. What does the protagonist want? What does it mean to them? And what's it going to cost them? Lay the cards on the table.
Okay, so how do we take all this amazing brain science, all these principles, and actually turn it into something practical, like for building a story from scratch?
Good question.
Let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk nuts and bolts. Maybe we can use a quick case study. Imagine just a tiny premise. A woman about to turn 40, she has a secret crush on a much younger actor.
Okay, yeah, let's build out Ray's story. First, we need those foundational details, right?
Right.
So Ray's a widowed painter. Her husband, Tom, he's much older, so she's kind of familiar with the age gaps already.
Okay, that makes sense.
She has a daughter, Chloe, who desperately wants to go to Gilead. Boom! There's a ticking clock. Pressure.
Got it.
Now, Ray's inner issue, her fatal flaw.
Yeah.
Let's say she's fundamentally not a risk taker. Maybe that stems from having a hypercritical art critic father.
Ah, the backstory influencing the present.
Exactly. Now, the inciting incident and the conflict. Ray has a fiancé, Will. He represents her safe, predictable, maybe slightly boring life.
The non-risk option.
Right. And then there's Cal, the young actor. He represents the excitement, the unknown, the risk.
Okay.
And let's add a coincidence that feels earned. Cal's family used to vacation on the same little Carolina island where Ray and her family always summered. Gives them a connection.
Nice. So how do they actually connect?
The setup for conflict. Ray decides at the end of the summer to stay alone on the island for a couple of weeks. She needs quiet time to make her big decisions about Will, about letting Chloe chase Gilead.
Alone on a deserted island.
Yeah, she knows there's a bit of risk. The island's deserted. It's hurricane season. But for a lifetime risk avoider, it feels like a small, manageable chance to take.
A baby step.
Kind of. And Cal. He also has a deadline he needs to report to a film set soon. Maybe he comes back to the island for one last visit, some quiet time too. This logically brings them together, isolated.
Okay, I see it.
So the real story isn't just will Ray fall for the young actor. It's about whether she can overcome her deep-seated fear, risk showing her paintings publicly, risk facing who she really is, and ultimately take the consequences, whatever they are.
That's a fantastic way to see how the internal flaw drives the external plot choices. It really highlights the importance of setups, too.
Absolutely critical.
You defined a setup as a piece of info the reader needs way in advance so a later payoff feels believable, right?
Exactly. It can be subtle, like letting us know early on that James happens to speak Swahili.
So later, when the only instructions to divert the meteor are in Swahili?
We don't groan when James says, hey, I can read that. It feels earned, not just convenient. The key is, it should maybe pique a little suspicion, make you wonder, why is that detail there? But not be a giant flashing sign.
Like the Die Hard example Cron uses.
Perfect example. John McClane making fists with his toes on the plane early on.
Seems like just a quirky character.
Right. But it's a brilliant setup for his later struggles running around barefoot on broken glass.
Yeah.
It makes his whole ordeal, his heroism, that much harder and more believable because we saw that little detail earlier.
It pays off.
Big time. And as for the journey of actually creating these stories, well, Ernest Hemingway famously said, all first drafts are shit.
Huh. Comforting in a way.
It is. But he also stressed they are vital. They're the raw material. The goal isn't perfection first time out. It's getting that underlying story down.
Identifying the core conflict and change.
Exactly. Which is why objective professional feedback is so incredibly valuable.
Not just friends and family.
Well, friends and family often suffer from love is blind bias.
Right.
They might feel an adrenaline rush reading your work and mistake it for brilliant writing when maybe it's just the plot working. You need someone objective. a literary consultant, an agent, an editor with real publishing or development experience who understands story structure.
Someone who knows the craft.
Yeah. Think about Michael Arndt, the screenwriter for Little Miss Sunshine. He apparently wrote over 100 drafts.
100.
Driven by the motto, no point in doing something if you're not going to do it right. That dedication to getting the story right.
That level of dedication, that perseverance, that's really what it takes. Reminds me of Jack London's quote, "Don't loaf and invite inspiration. Light out after it with a club."
Huh. Love that.
Yeah.
So if we boil down this whole deep dive,
To the takeaway.
stories aren't just about events happening. They are fundamentally about internal change. Change driven by unavoidable external conflict. And it all works because it taps into how our brains are wired, constantly seeking meaning, looking for cause and effect.
And they let us learn safely.
Exactly. Stories let us vicariously experience someone else suffering the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune.
So we learn how to maybe dodge those darts ourselves.
That's the idea. Learn how to navigate the world better, emotionally and socially.
So here's a final thought for you, the listener. Given that our brains are wired this way, constantly seeking meaning, constantly connecting dots, how might understanding these mechanics of story help us? Not just to write better, sure, but maybe to better interpret the stories we encounter every single day, in the news and conversations with friends, maybe even the stories we tell ourselves about our own lives.
That's a fascinating question.
What specific internal fatal flaw, maybe, are you trying to overcome right now? And how is the plot of your life currently testing it? We really encourage you to maybe reevaluate the narratives you consume and the ones you create through this really powerful new lens.